In the heart of a bustling town, Chief Dyke and his wife, Madam Necker, lived in a grand mansion with their 3 children. Their home was known for its warmth and kindness, as Chief Dyke was a respected businessman and his wife was a generous woman who often helped the needy. Despite their wealth, they treated their servants with fairness, ensuring they were well fed and cared for. One fateful morning, Madam Necker decided to hire a new house help to assist with the increasing household chores. She instructed her driver to take her to the village, where she met an elderly woman who spoke highly of her niece, Aku, a young girl seeking employment. Aku was a slender, dark-skinned girl with bright eyes that masked her true intentions. She appeared shy and obedient, nodding at every word Madam Necker spoke. Convinced that she had found the right person, Madam Necker brought Aku back to the mansion and gave her a place in the servants' quarters. At first, Aku performed her duties diligently. She woke up early, cleaned the house, and prepared meals without complaint. The family quickly grew fond of her, especially the children, who often played with her. But unknown to them, a storm was brewing beneath her calm exterior. Aku had grown up in hardship, always feeling looked down upon by wealthier people. Though she seemed grateful, a seed of resentment had been planted in her heart. One evening, as she was setting the table for dinner, Madam Necker noticed that Aku had forgotten to clean the silverware properly. In a firm but motherly tone, she scolded her. "Aku, I expect better from you. You must take pride in your work." Though the words were not harsh, Aku's heart burned with anger. She clenched her fists, forcing a smile, but deep inside, something dark was stirring. A sinister thought crept into her mind, one that would change everything. Aku's heart burned long after Madam Necker's words had faded. She had been scolded before, but something about the tone, the expectation of perfection, made her feel small and unworthy. That night, as she lay in her small room, staring at the wooden ceiling, her mind churned with bitter thoughts. Why must I always be the one to serve? Why do they get to live in luxury while I work like a slave? She muttered to herself. Days passed, but Aku's resentment only grew. Madam Necker continued to correct her when she made mistakes, but she never shouted or punished her unfairly. Yet, each correction felt like an insult. Aku began to see her employers not as kind people but as oppressors who looked down on her. One evening, she overheard the children laughing in the living room as their mother handed them gifts. She peeked through the doorway, watching as Madam Necker embraced them. A deep envy settled in her chest. No one had ever loved her like that. No one had ever given her gifts just for existing. I will make them suffer, she whispered, her eyes gleaming with a dangerous light. They will learn not to treat me as less than them. The thought of revenge settled in her mind like a parasite, growing stronger with each passing day. Aku's plan did not come to her all at once, but slowly, piece by piece, like a puzzle forming in her mind. She did not want to be caught, so she knew she had to be careful. She started small, adding a little extra salt to their meals, making the soup slightly bitter, letting their clothes stay damp so they would have a musty smell. When Madam Necker frowned at the odd taste of her food, Aku apologized innocently. I must have made a mistake, Ma, she would say, bowing her head. But these were only tests. Aku wanted something bigger. She remembered the small bottles of rat poison she had seen in the storeroom, used to keep pests away from the pantry. If she could mix a little into their food, just enough to make them sick, she would see them weak, suffering, needing help, just as she had been all her life. One evening, when everyone had gone to bed, Aku tiptoed into the pantry, her heart beat loud in her ears. Her fingers trembled as she picked up the small bottle of poison. She held it close to her chest, feeling its weight. This was the beginning of something dark, something she could never take back. The next morning, Aku prepared breakfast as usual. She made sure to serve Madam Neka and Chief Dyke first, carefully adding a few drops of the poison to their portions. It was just enough to cause discomfort but not to kill. As the family sat down to eat, she watched, her hands folded in front of her apron. They took their first bites, and Aku's pulse quickened. Minutes passed, then Chief Dyke frowned. "My stomach feels strange," he muttered. "Mine too," Madam Neka said, pressing a hand to her belly. The poison was working. The couple spent the rest of the day feeling weak and nauseous, blaming it on something they ate outside the house. Aku said nothing. She only observed. But this was not enough. If she wanted true revenge, she would have to go further. Now that she had tested the poison, Aku felt bolder. She decided to target the children next. But this time, she hesitated. The little ones had always been kind to her, giggling as they played in the yard, calling her Auntie Aku. But kindness did not erase the resentment in her heart. They were still the children of the people who had scolded her. They still lived a life she could never have. One evening, she made their favorite meal, jollof rice with fried plantain. But before serving it, she added a small dose of poison to their portions. She held her breath as they ate, laughing and chatting about their day. Hours later, the children began to complain of stomach pains. Madam Neka panicked, calling the doctor immediately. Aku stayed in the background, pretending to be concerned. But deep inside, she felt a sick satisfaction. This is only the beginning, she thought. Madam Neka could not ignore the strange illnesses in her household. First, she and her husband had fallen sick, and now the children were affected. She began to suspect that something was wrong, though she could not put her finger on it. One evening, she sat in the living room, her face tight with worry. "What if someone is poisoning us?" she whispered to Chief Dyke. Aku, who was cleaning nearby, stiffened. Had she been too obvious? "We should be careful with what we eat," Chief Dyke said. "Maybe we should start buying food from outside for a while." Aku clenched her fist. If they stopped eating her meals, her plan would fail. She needed to act quickly before they discovered the truth. Aku knew she had to be more cautious. She decided to wait a few days before making her next move, ensuring that Madam Neka's suspicions would fade. She continued to act innocent, going about her chores diligently and even showing extra concern for the children's health. One afternoon, as she was in the kitchen preparing dinner, little Chinedu wandered in, his curious eyes scanning the countertops. His gaze landed on the small bottle Aku had foolishly left too close to the edge. "Auntie Aku, what is this?" he asked, reaching for it. Aku's heart pounded in her chest as she quickly snatched the bottle from his hands. She forced a smile, trying to mask her fear. "It's just medicine for the rats," she said sweetly. "Run along now. Dinner will be ready soon." Chinedu hesitated, looking at the bottle again, but he was too young to suspect anything. He nodded and skipped out of the kitchen. Aku let out a slow breath, realizing how close she had come to being exposed. But the incident made her nervous. If the boy mentioned the bottle to his mother, it could raise suspicion. She decided to delay her plan for a few more days, waiting for the right moment to strike again. Meanwhile, Madam Neka remained unsettled. The illnesses in the house were becoming too frequent. She ordered all the food in the kitchen to be thrown out and bought fresh supplies. She also instructed that no one should eat anything without her supervision. Aku clenched her fist. Madam Necker was making things difficult. But she wasn't going to give up. She just needed to be more careful. One afternoon, Madam Necker sat with her best friend, Mama Ijeoma, discussing the strange occurrences in her house. "My children have been sick too often," Madam Necker sighed. "I don't understand what's happening." Mama Ijeoma frowned. "Have you considered that it might be someone inside your house?" Madam Necker's eyes widened. "Inside my house?" "Yes. Sometimes, those we trust the most are the ones who harm us." The thought sent chills down Madam Necker's spine. She had always trusted her workers, especially Aku, who had been so obedient. But now, a small voice in her head whispered, "What if?" That night, she lay in bed, unable to sleep. Had she been too trusting? Was someone in her home trying to harm her family? She decided to be more observant. If someone was behind the sickness, she would find out. Aku was careful, but even the most cunning plans have flaws. One evening, Madam Necker pretended to have a headache and asked Aku to serve dinner while she rested. But secretly, she watched from the shadows as Aku moved in the kitchen. Aku, thinking she was alone, took out the small bottle and poured a few drops into the soup. She stirred quickly, unaware of the eyes watching her every move. Madam Necker's breath caught in her throat. It was Aku. Her hands trembled as she stepped back, careful not to make a sound. She could not believe it. The girl she had taken in, fed, and cared for was poisoning them. She had seen enough. She needed a plan to catch Aku red-handed. The next morning, Madam Necker pretended everything was normal. She went about her day as usual, speaking kindly to Aku and giving her instructions as if nothing had changed. But inside, she was fuming. She spoke to Chief Dyke privately and told him everything she had seen. Together, they decided to set a trap. That evening, Madam Necker deliberately left the kitchen unattended, leaving the meal half prepared. She then hid behind the curtain with Chief Dyke and waited. Sure enough, Aku entered, glancing around cautiously. Thinking no one was watching, she took out the bottle and poured poison into the soup. Madam Necker gasped loudly. Aku turned sharply, her face draining of color. Chief Dyke stepped forward, his expression dark with anger. "Aku, what have you done?" Madam Necker's voice shook with betrayal. Aku's mouth opened and closed, but no words came. She had been caught. Madam Necker wasted no time. She ordered the guards to lock Aku in a room while they decided what to do. Aku sat on the floor, shaking with fear. She had always thought she could outsmart them. She had never expected to be caught so easily. The next morning, Chief Dyke called all the workers together. He held up the small bottle of poison. "Does anyone know what this is?" The workers murmured, shaking their heads. "This was found in Aku's hands last night," Madam Necker said, her voice heavy with emotion. "She has been poisoning our food." A shocked silence fell over the group. Aku lowered her head, shame washing over her. "Why would you do this?" Madam Necker asked, her voice breaking. "We treated you like family." Tears slipped down Aku's face. I was angry. I felt like nothing more than a servant. I wanted you to suffer like I have suffered. Madam Necker's eyes filled with tears, but her voice was firm. You repaid kindness with evil, Aku. And now, you must face the consequences. Chief Dyke wasted no time in calling the authorities. When the police arrived, they listened to Madam Neko's testimony and searched Aku's room, where they found more poison hidden under her bed. There was no escape. Aku was taken away in handcuffs, her face pale with regret. As she was led away, she turned to Madam Neko. "I am sorry," she whispered. But it was too late for apologies. The household was shaken. The children, too young to understand fully, kept asking where Aku had gone. Madam Neko told them she had to leave, but inside, she knew they had narrowly escaped disaster. For weeks, she found herself double-checking everything, making sure no harm could come to her family again. But deep inside, she felt a sadness she could not explain. Aku had been like a daughter, yet she had chosen darkness over gratitude. One evening, as Madam Neko sat on the porch, Mama Ijeoma visited again. "You look troubled," Mama Ijeoma said. Madam Neko sighed. "I keep asking myself, did I do something wrong? Did I push her too hard?" Mama Ijeoma shook her head. "No, my friend. Some hearts are filled with darkness, no matter how much kindness you show them. You did your best." Madam Neko nodded, but the ache in her heart remained. Years later, the story of Aku became a warning in the village. Mothers told their daughters about the house help who poisoned her masters out of jealousy, teaching them the dangers of envy and resentment. Madam Neko's children grew up strong and healthy, never forgetting the lessons their mother had learned. And as for Aku, she spent the rest of her days regretting the choices that had led her down a path of destruction. The tale was told for generations, a reminder that evil never goes unpunished and that kindness, no matter how much given, cannot change a heart unwilling to receive it.